"You're coming with me to the Charity Gala on Saturday." It wasn't a question. It never was with Harrison Webb. He said it the same way he said everything, like the words had already been decided somewhere above the clouds, and the rest of the world just needed time to catch up. He didn't look up from his laptop when he said it, didn't even pause between emails, just let the sentence drop into the kitchen like a stone into still water, and waited for the ripples to settle on their own. Claire Ashford set down the glass she was washing. She turned slowly, the way a person turns when they're deciding whether what they just heard was real. "Sorry?" "The gala." Harrison finally looked up. His eyes moved over her the way they moved over balance sheets, cataloging, calculating, finding the relevant figures. "Saturday evening, black tie. I need someone to accompany me and my usual arrangements fell through." Claire stared at him for a moment. She had worked in the Webb household for 4 months. 4 months of early mornings and late evenings. Of making sure 8-year-old Milo ate something other than cereal. Of reading the same dog-eared chapter of a space book until the boy finally fell asleep with his dinosaur collection arranged in a perfect circle around his pillow. 4 months of learning the rhythms of a house that had forgotten how to feel like a home. In those 4 months, Harrison Webb had spoken to her directly maybe 30 times. Most of those conversations were logistical, Milo's schedule, the grocery order, whether she'd remembered to call the pediatrician. This was the first time he had ever asked her to go anywhere. "I'm your son's nanny," she said carefully. "I'm aware." He turned back to his laptop. "I'll have a car pick you up at 6:30. You'll need appropriate attire. I'll have something sent over, Mr. Webb." "Harrison." He said it without looking up. "We've discussed this." They had, once. On her second day when she'd called him Mr. Webb and he'd corrected her with the same tone he used to correct his assistant's meeting notes. Not warm, just efficient. "Harrison," she tried again. "I appreciate the thought. But I don't think. It's not a social invitation, Claire." He closed the laptop, looked at her properly for the first time. "The Whitmore Foundation Gala is the most important event in my professional calendar. I attend every year. This year I need a companion for the evening. You are here, and you are capable of an evening in public. That's the extent of the consideration." She held his gaze. "You are here, and you are capable of an evening in public." Later she would think about those words. About all the ways they described a vase or a cufflink, not a person. About how he said it without any cruelty, which somehow made it worse. "All right," she said. "Saturday." He nodded and opened his laptop again. The conversation apparently was over. What Harrison Webb did not know about Claire Ashford could have filled several rooms. He knew she had a degree from a state school. He knew she had excellent references. He knew she had a calm voice and a talent for making Milo laugh at things that hadn't made Milo laugh in almost 2 years. Since before his mother left. Since before the house started feeling like a waiting room for something nobody could name. He did not know that Claire had a master's degree in child psychology from Georgetown. He did not know she had turned down a research position to take this job, because the posting had mentioned a child who stopped talking to strangers after his parents divorced, and something in that detail had caught her like a fishhook and wouldn't let go. He did not know she had a reason for that. A specific, personal, bone-deep reason. He did not know anything about the 7 years she had spent watching her younger brother disappear inside himself after their father walked out, and how she had spent every one of those years figuring out how to reach him. He did not know she was still figuring it out, even now, even at 31. Even with the degree on the wall, and the clinical hours logged, and the publications that no one at this address would ever read. He did not know her, but Milo did. Milo, who had barely spoken above a whisper for the first 3 weeks, had started saving her things, little things, a drawing of a rocket ship with her name spelled out in wobbly letters across the wing. A pebble he'd found in the backyard that was, he explained very seriously, shaped exactly like the state of Texas. A note tucked under the kitchen door one morning that read, "I like when you make the eggs because you don't cut the toast wrong." She kept all of them in a small tin box on the nightstand in her room. On Friday evening the dress arrived. It was deep green silk with simple lines and no excessive ornamentation. Someone had thought about it. She didn't know if that someone was Harrison or an assistant, but the dress was exactly right. Understated enough to be elegant, fitted enough to be present. She stood in front of the mirror for a long time. She was not nervous about the gala. She had attended events like this before, in a different lifetime, when she was part of a research team that got invited to foundation dinners and donor evenings because academics were decorative at such things, like well-dressed footnotes. She was nervous about something else. Milo had sat on her bed while she unpacked the garment bag, asking questions about where she was going and why and whether she would be back before his bedtime. She had told him yes, absolutely, she would be back before 10, and she would come check on him even if he was already asleep. "Dad's going too?" he asked. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "He doesn't usually bring anyone." "I know, he doesn't really bring anyone anywhere," Milo said. And there was something in his voice, not sadness exactly. More like a child who has learned to state facts about loneliness so flatly that the loneliness itself becomes invisible. She sat down next to him on the bed. "Does that bother you?" she asked. He shrugged the way kids shrug when the answer is yes, but they've decided yes is too expensive to give away. "I just don't want him to be at the gala by himself," he said finally. "Even if you're there, he's kind of always by himself." She put her arm around him. He let her. That, too, was new. "I'll pay attention to him," she said. "I promise." The ride to the Whitmore Foundation Gala took 22 minutes. Harrison spent 19 of them on his phone. Not rudely, or rather, not with any awareness that it might be rude. He spoke to someone named Dale about a third-quarter projection, and someone else named Keiko about a contract amendment, and his voice in the close space of the car was the voice of a man who had spent so long existing primarily in professional contexts that it had become his only register. Claire watched the city move past the window. In the last 3 minutes, when the calls ended and the car turned toward the glittering sprawl of the Ashworth Hotel, he glanced at her. "You look appropriate," he said. She turned from the window, studied him. "Thank you," she said. "So do you." He seemed to register something in her tone, a very small, very precise dryness because something shifted in his expression. Not quite embarrassment, more like the look of a person who has just noticed a mathematical error they should have caught earlier. He said, "Nothing else." The car stopped. The doors opened. The gala was exactly what she expected and exactly what he needed, which were two entirely different things. It was beautiful in the way that expensive events are beautiful. Every surface polished, every arrangement deliberate, every conversation conducted at a frequency designed to signal importance. The kind of room where people shook hands and meant something other than hello. Harrison moved through it like he owned it, which, in several practical senses, he almost did. The Webb Foundation was one of the Whitmore's primary donors, and people tracked him across the room with the alert attention of compass needles finding north. He was introduced to her as his companion for the evening, and she watched them calibrate their responses in real time. Who is she? What does she do? Why is she here and not someone more legible? She smiled. She shook hands. She answered questions with the pleasant vagueness of someone who has decided not to perform for an audience that hasn't earned the performance. And then she met Gillian Ashworth. Gillian was the kind of woman who arrived in rooms rather than entering them. Mid-50s, immaculate, with the particular confidence of someone who has been powerful long enough that they've stopped needing to announce it. She chaired the Whitmore Foundation Board, and she looked at Claire the way scientists look at specimens, with a curiosity that was genuinely interested but not personally invested. "And what do you do, Claire?" she asked. "I work with children," Claire said. Gillian tilted her head. "In what capacity?" "Currently, I'm caring for Harrison's son." A small pause. "I'm also a child psychologist." Something moved in Gillian's expression, genuine interest, reorienting. "Georgetown," she said, not a question, and Claire realized with a small internal jolt that Gillian had apparently read something, somewhere. "I saw a paper last year, Childhood Grief Responses After Parental Abandonment." "Was that co-authored?" "Yes," Claire said, "with Dr. Reyes at Georgetown Memorial." Gillian looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned toward Harrison, who had returned from a conversation nearby, and was watching this exchange with an expression Claire couldn't immediately name. "You brought your child psychologist to my gala, Harrison," Gillian said, with a tone that was equal parts amusement and reproach. "I brought my companion for the evening," he said. "Same woman." Gillian smiled and held out her hand to Claire again. "I'd very much like to continue this conversation at dinner." She moved away. Harrison stood very still. Claire turned to look at him. His jaw was set. Something worked behind his eyes, the particular machinery of a man recalculating something he'd been certain of. You have a master's degree, he said. And a clinical license, she said pleasantly. And about 400 hours of supervised practice. Do you want to see my CV? I have it memorized. He stared at her. Why didn't you? Because you didn't ask. She held his gaze steadily. You asked for references and availability. I provided those. My educational history wasn't part of the conversation. A beat. It usually isn't. She didn't say the rest. Didn't say, people like you don't tend to ask. Didn't say, you looked at me and saw someone useful in a limited and specific way, and that is not my problem to solve. She had learned a long time ago that some points land harder in silence. He said nothing for a long time. Around them the gala continued its careful choreography, crystal catching the light, laughter landing at the right pitch, a string quartet adjusting from cocktail hour into something quieter and more serious. I apologize, Harrison said finally. It came out stiffly, the way apologies come out when they're real but unfamiliar, not polished, not the practiced sorry of a man who has said it in boardrooms and meant something strategic. This was the other kind. For what specifically? She asked. He looked at her sharply. Then something softened marginally at the edges of his expression. I said you were capable of an evening in public. You did. That was… He stopped. That was reductive. She said it was. A long pause. I wasn't trying to be unkind, he said. I know, she said. That's the part that sticks. Dinner was long and full of conversations that mattered. Not all of them with Harrison, but the ones that were mattered in a different way than the others. He sat beside her, and for the first time in the 4 months she had worked in his house, he seemed to be actually in a room. Not half elsewhere, not running the third-quarter projections through his head while the rest of him went through the correct motions. He asked her about the paper, about Milo, but not the logistical version. Not did he sleep, did he eat, but the other version, the one that cost more to ask. Is he getting better? Harrison said. Actually better? She set down her fork. Yes, she said, slowly. He's starting to trust that people will still be there when he turns around. She paused. That's the core of it, with kids like him. It's not about talking. It's about someone showing up, consistently, until showing up becomes the proof. He was quiet for a long moment. She watched him absorb it. I'm not there enough, he said. She didn't answer, which was, in its own way, an answer. I know I'm not there enough. He picked up his wine glass, set it down without drinking. I tell myself it's for him, the work, the hours, building something that will matter after I'm gone. But he's 8 years old and I'm not sure he knows I notice him. He knows, Claire said. Harrison looked at her. He talks about you, she said. More than you think. He told me last week that you used to have a tradition of watching the rocket launches together. That you'd set an alarm, even on school nights, because some things were worth being tired for. Harrison's face changed. It was the kind of change that happens when someone says a thing you'd stored away somewhere too deep to visit. Not forgotten, just buried under the years of being too busy to dig. We haven't done that in a while, he said. His voice was different, quieter. There's a launch scheduled in 3 weeks, Claire said. Crew mission, big deal. He looked at her for a long moment. He told you that, Harrison said. He has a countdown going on his chalkboard. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was the full kind. The kind that has too much in it to fit into words without losing something. The moment that the gala would be remembered for happened near the end of the evening. A man named Franklin Hurst, old money, older opinions, had been making his way around the room the way certain men do at certain events, positioning himself at the edges of important conversations, adding weight to them by proximity. He'd caught Claire twice during cocktail hour, each time with a variation on the same basic inquiry. And what is it you do exactly? Delivered with the tone of someone who already assumed the answer wouldn't satisfy him. She'd answered the same way both times. Cleanly, briefly, without inflation. The third time he was standing with a small group that included Harrison, Jillian, and 2 foundation trustees when Claire rejoined them from a conversation across the room. Ah, Hurst said, the nanny returns. It landed the way he intended, the slight snag of it, the deliberate diminishment. A few people shifted almost imperceptibly. Jillian's expression flickered. Claire stopped. She didn't rush. She didn't flush. She didn't laugh it off, which would have been the easier option and the one she knew Hurst expected. That's accurate, she said pleasantly. I'm also a licensed child psychologist with a Georgetown master's and about a decade of clinical research in pediatric trauma. But nanny is a fine shorthand for the evening. She let a half-beat pass. "What's yours?" Hurst blinked. Someone in the group made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Franklin is a trustee emeritus," Jillian offered, with a composure that barely concealed something gleeful. "Largely ceremonial at this point. Then we've both been accurately described," Claire said. She picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and turned back to the main conversation as though the exchange had been entirely unremarkable. The group did not move on from it as quickly as she did. Later, one of the trustees, a woman named Beverly Cho, who had been in global health policy for 30 years, found Claire near the dessert table and said, quietly and with great sincerity, "That was one of the best things I've seen at one of these in 20 years. "It wasn't anything," Claire said. "It was exactly what it needed to be," Beverly said, "which is why it was something." The car ride back was different from the one going. Harrison didn't make any calls. He sat on his side of the seat and watched the city in the same way Claire had watched it on the way in, like someone who had just been reminded that things look different depending on which direction you were moving. "Jillian asked for your contact information," he said. "She mentioned the foundation is expanding their early childhood trauma program." Claire looked out the window. "She wants to talk about a consulting partnership. Are you going to?" "I haven't decided." The city slid past. A red light held them at an intersection where a couple walked a dog, and a man on the corner was selling flowers out of a bucket, and the whole scene had the ordinary ache of things that keep going whether you're watching or not. "Why did you take this job?" Harrison asked. "Actually take it." She considered how much to give. "The posting mentioned a child who had difficulty trusting people after his family changed," she said. "I know what that looks like from the inside. I have a brother, younger. He went through something similar when we were kids. I spent years learning how to reach him." She paused. "I suppose I wanted to use that for something real." Harrison was quiet. "Milo is lucky," he said finally. "Milo is working very hard," she corrected gently. "He deserves the credit." Another silence, but a different kind now. Not the distance of two people who had nothing to say, but the quiet of two people who had said enough for one night and were deciding what came next. "There's a launch in 3 weeks," Harrison said. She turned to look at him. "I'm aware," she said. "I'm going to set the alarm." She held his gaze for a moment. Outside, the lights of the city blurred past, and Harrison Webb looked, for the first time since she'd known him, like a man who had remembered something important and intended to keep it this time. 3 weeks later, at 4:47 in the morning, the alarm went off. Harrison was already awake. He moved quietly down the hall to Milo's room and opened the door to find his son sitting up in bed with his spacebook open on his knees, waiting, the countdown erased from his chalkboard because they had reached 0. "Dad," Milo said. Just that. Harrison sat on the edge of the bed. He put his arm around his son the way fathers used to do, before the weight of becoming someone important had made ordinary things feel out of reach. They watched the launch on the small television in Milo's room. The countdown, the ignition, the slow, impossible rise of something enormous lifting itself, free of the earth, on nothing but fire and the stubborn human belief that some distances were worth crossing. Milo pressed his face against Harrison's shoulder when the rocket cleared the tower. Harrison looked at the top of his son's head and felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years settle back into place, like a key finding its lock. Claire stood in the doorway. She hadn't been invited, hadn't needed to be. She'd heard the alarm and followed the light down the hall, and now she stood in the frame with her arms crossed, loosely over her chest, watching not the screen but the two of them. Harrison looked up. Found her there. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But when Milo reached out without looking and grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the bed, she sat down on his other side, and the three of them watched the rocket climb into the dark until it became a point of light indistinguishable from a star. Milo fell asleep before re-entry. Harrison and Claire stayed until the broadcast ended, not talking much, the room quiet except for the even breathing of a child who had decided, in the slow and painstaking way that children decide such things, that the people beside him would still be there when he woke up. That was the beginning, not the gala. Not the moment with Franklin Hurst, though that would become a story Gillian Ashworth told at every foundation dinner for years afterward. Not the car ride or the apology or the dress that arrived in a garment bag and fit like someone had paid attention. The beginning was this. A small room before sunrise, a child asleep between two people who had each, in their own way, been learning how to stay.